All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. We very much appreciate you taking the time to join us today. My name is Jeff Pugliese. I serve as Vice President here at the Middlesex County Chamber of Commerce, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to a special chamber virtual workshop presented by our Affordable Housing Committee, which is titled Affordable Housing in a Pandemic World. Before turning the program over to our committee chairman, Bob Fusari, I would like to invite our viewers to submit questions via the chat portal or the Q&A portal, and we will do our best to get it into the conversation. If you are joining us on the phone and you want to email me a question, you are welcome to do so at Jeffrey, that's Jeffrey, at middlesexchamber.com. And again, we'll certainly do our best to get it into the conversation. I'd like to, on behalf of the chamber, thank our panelists, and we look forward to hearing their remarks this afternoon and appreciate their willingness to join and serve in their positions. So without further delay, it is my pleasure to turn the program over to the chairman of the Middlesex County Chamber of Commerce Affordable Housing Committee, Mr. Bob Fusari. Good afternoon, Bob.
Good afternoon, Jeff, and everyone else who's joined us, our panelists and the people who are on the webinar. When we started this effort last fall, we thought it would be in person, but as we all know, that's not possible today. And we've got quite a few participants, so we want to thank everybody for joining us. The Affordable Housing Committee of the Chamber began 2006, 2007. I was chairman in 2006, 7, chairman of the board of the Chamber, and I tried to bring housing as an issue to the Chamber. And Larry was very cooperative with me in that effort, Larry McHugh, the president. And when I came off my term as chairman, we began this committee called the Affordable Housing Committee. I'm glad we did. And of course, a number of other affordable housing efforts are made now around the state. I think we were a good catalyst for that. But we've had a number of seminars in person. And I think one of the last ones was with one of our guests today. And I'll begin with that. Sila Mesquita Bruno, who is the commissioner of the Department of Housing. She may have been our last in-person seminar back in 2019. What is Jeff? The fall of 2019?
That is correct, yeah.
It's been too long. We want to welcome you back. And with her today is someone else who's actually in her department, part of the Department of Housing. That's Dawn Parker, who's running Unite Connecticut, a rental, I'm going to call it a rental assistance program, but she will explain that a little more. And as I understand, it's one of the best in the country. The performance has been outstanding. We also have with us today Greg Gigali, who is it past chairman or president? Greg, I forgot the term of the National Association of Home Builders. Is it the chairman or?
It's chairman.
Chairman.
Yeah.
Chairman.
I lost track of this chairman president thing, which began a few years ago. And just so you know, that's a 1-year term, but it's about a 6-year commitment as you climb through the chairs, and you're now the immediate past chairman.
Right.
And I want to thank Greg for that service, but he'll bring a national perspective on what's happening in affordable housing and how that affects Connecticut. And then last but not least, Sam Gold from Rivercog. Sam has been a part of the chamber here for quite some time and very active on the housing front, affordable housing and that sort of thing. And I've been with Sam and Greg and I were with Sam on a webinar a few months ago, and I think it was very effective. It was a well-run webinar that a lot of your homework, and I was proud to be part of that. So I want to welcome everybody here today, and let's get started. I have Haley Stafford is also with us today. You see her name. She's the technician who put this all together, and let's hope it keeps working. Okay, thank you. Sila, why don't you kick us off with the subject matter you're going to talk about?
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Bob, and thank you to the Middlesex Chamber of Commerce Affordable Housing Committee. Thank you for all the people that are participating. Happy New Year. And Bob, as you said, I was so looking forward to have an in-person meeting because, you know, for the past 2 years, it has been so difficult with this COVID. And you would think that I would be used to do these seminars, but I always like to be in person and not to talk through a screen, because I can see you, the 5 of us, but I don't see the 54 people that are behind the screens. But in any event, thank you very much for inviting me and Dawn to just give you a couple of highlights of the work that we're doing at the Department of Housing. It has been hard to, 2 years we're going to with this pandemic, and like everybody else has been able to continue doing the work that we need to do in many different aspects, addressing the homeless, being able to provide resources. For the winter, for this past year, we provided $5 million to make sure that the shelters and the service provider had the resources to provide for those that they need a place to stay through the winter. And our efforts at the department goes not only from the homeless shelters, but also to the production and preservation of affordable units, as well as promoting homeownership. So we're trying to encompass everything from an apartment to also provide those opportunity to someone to be a homeowner. So one of the most significant initiatives that we have been working for the past 10 months has been UNICT. We were thankful that the federal government provided us with almost $400 million to provide rent relief to those that suffered from the pandemic and lost their jobs or a loved one and needed that relief. So today we have been able to pay over $200 million in less than 10 months is unbelievable. So 43,000 applications that were approved, 7,000 landlords that received these benefits for in about 30,000 households that were that have been helped. And John will go a little more into the details of the program. So it has been a great program and helped a lot of the families. Our next initiative is we will be receiving $123 million from Treasury to assist those families that have been suffering from the pandemic and they have not been able to meet their obligations as a mortgage holder. Those are for homeowners to try to prevent foreclosure. And we have partnered with CHFA to administer this program on our behalf. We are planning to start this program sometime in the spring. So those kind are in the immediate programs that we have been working on to respond to the emergencies that we have had through these 2 years of pandemic. Under the development piece, which I know Bob usually likes to know a lot more what we're doing on preservation and production. The past, believe it or not, for 2 years through this pandemic, we were able to preserve and to produce about 5,000 units. That was more than $1.1 billion in total development cost. The state's funding for these projects was about $266 million. So it has not been easy, but we kept working 150% through teleworking because we were able to do the telework piece. And now, right now, we have in process, we have over 7,000 units in different development stages. So, I don't know if you heard, but this past December, the Bond Commission approved another $78 million for housing. That was preservation and production of new units. We also received $20 million to support first-time home buyers with a new forgivable loan, which will start sometime in early spring. $5 million for pre-development to support our nonprofits, $15 million to invest in 5 low-income neighborhoods, and we are still working on the details on that. And then January 12th, for many of you and some of the developers that are in the audience, CHFA received 15 applications for the 9% round. And those probably will be announced on time. Pushing everybody to work a little harder and faster. The end of April, the end of March, CHFA staff will be killing me, or the beginning of April. But we want to make sure that projects really do not take 10 years. Projects should take max 4 years, but that's pushing it because you have a year of financing, and then you can have another 18 months. And Greg, you are a builder, right? So 18 months. 2 years, so we should be able to produce more units. So I'm pushing the envelope, and I know that my staff, although they get scared, they'll go with it. We also have right now, in addition, in the funding arena, we also have $30 million in ARPA home funds. By regulation, we do have to submit a plan to HUD to how we're going to use those resources. So we are submitting those probably in the next couple of weeks because we do have to have public hearings. We will submit our plan, but our plan is to use all these resources on the production of more units. So I think I'm going to leave it at that so that we can continue the conversation. Our goal, as I said before, is to be able to wrap around all the type of housing that we need for our citizens. The lack of affordable housing has been there for a long time. It was there when I came to this country. I won't tell you how long, because then you know my age, right? But I was in a subsidized place, and housing was very hard to afford. Worked in a factory with minimum wages, and I live in an apartment I had to live with my brothers, 2-bedroom apartment, and we still couldn't afford it just to have one individual apartment. So today, more than ever, because of the pandemic, we're trying to separate many people from living in apartments, right? And it's difficult. It's difficult because the rents have not kept up with the minimum wages. So the rents have been inflated and keep increasing, but the wages do not increase at the same pace as the cost of an apartment. So I'd love to have this conversation. So I'll stop there, and we'll get back as everybody else if you have any questions after.
Thank you very much, Zila. By the way, we talk about somebody who's experienced. You've lived the experience of housing, but you also have lived the experience of creating that housing in the separate from your job at the Department of Housing. So when we talk about somebody with experience, you certainly come with that. And thank you. Dawn, I want to go to you next. I've known you for a long time in a lot of venues, but you've done a remarkable job here. Why don't you continue this discussion about Unite Connecticut?
Awesome. Thanks, Bob. It's fun to be back in Middlesex today because that's, of course, where my heart has been all these, 18 years in the housing world. My roots are Middlesex, so I appreciate being here. And Unite CT, it is, like the commissioner was saying, there's just over $400 million for Connecticut so far from Treasury. We do continue to respond when they have reallocation requests in hopes that we could secure more funding for Connecticut. So it's definitely like we'll continue to chase the money for our renters and landlords. In our program, we choose to pay landlords and electric companies directly on behalf of the tenants who have fallen off track because of the pandemic. And Unite CT helps tenants with up to 12 months of rent assistance or $15,000. And we know that in our program, the average that a tenant needs is about $8,500 to get back on their feet after the pandemic situation. So our $15,000 cap, it's a really good cap for those that might have, owe more than that. But our average is the $8,500. I looked up the Middlesex numbers because I know it's always good to hear local. Like the commissioner said, we do have about $200 million in the state of Connecticut that's gone out into the local economy. And in Middlesex County, there's about $5 million that's gone out. In addition, there's another about 5 million that's being reviewed for payments. So we basically we continue to work, right? So the cases come in every day. They're put out to our case review teams to get additional information and clarify any kind of questions before those payments are made. But Middlesex County is doing really well with getting money into that local economy too. So $5 million in less than 8 months. That's a nice infusion into that rental market. Everything we do is online at Unite CT. Obviously, we've had about 90,000 people who've entered the online system. So that software is our best friend. It's where we collect all the information. We can make sure that the integrity is nice and high, and we can pull reports and data, which also helps us to determine what are we seeing for trends and where do we see that we could focus on different programming or services to populations in the state of Connecticut, those renters who we see similarities and we want to do more to stabilize those households. Part of Unite CT is housing stability services, and we have 16 Unite CT resource centers scattered throughout the state of Connecticut. And those resource centers are there to help people successfully apply to Unite CT, but also they provide additional links to services such as financial literacy, so all the budgeting work. If anyone needs any legal assistance or mediation, maybe the relationship has been broken down between the tenant and landlord, we want to help that. We have relocation support, homeless prevention support. All of the workforce boards are involved so that there's employment training, certification programs, and job placement links to that so people can get back on their feet. And all of the community action agencies are also involved. So that really talks about what's happening next. So we can help financially to get people back on track, but really there could be more in their life that they need to change in order to stabilize for the long haul. We think about the immigrant families that will not be successful with Unite CT. It's very low barrier for Unite CT, really, but some people do not have a photo ID, or they do not have a landlord who would agree to work with them and provide the lease and different documentation that's required. And so we work with the Connecticut Institute of Refugees and Immigrants to make sure that everybody who needs help is getting the help to get back on their feet. And we also have a wonderful partnership with statewide legal services, which includes for our local, that Middlesex County, it's Connecticut Legal Services, and all of judicial, all of the housing courts. Everybody's on board with working really hard for eviction prevention as our primary focus, because obviously it's harder all around if somebody gets evicted to get back on their feet, no matter how much money they owe. So a lot of work goes into eviction prevention. And we do have 16 eviction prevention specialists throughout the state in our resource centers that really do more one-on-one services to really figure out what's going on and try to long-term prevent a reoccurrence of that eviction. Our website is www.unitect.ct.gov. We have so many tools and trainings and resources that are on there. And it's also interesting, a lot of people like to follow along with our dashboard so that you can see what our data is, and you can drill down into the town where you live or where you serve, and you can see how many households have applied, how many households have been funded, what kind of money has come into the local economy, which is very interesting for everybody to see this real localized significant impact to housing people, but also to recovering financially from the pandemic. So probably, I'll wait until the end because I know we're trying to get everybody in. I'll wait until the end to answer questions. But basically, kind of, if anybody needs help out there, we really promote help a friend. There are barriers for some people with technology. We do have the resource centers. We have a call center. We have a live chat feature on our webpage, but still, sometimes people just need extra help. And so we encourage, because it is online and if there's no barriers for helping somebody, that we all help our neighbors to try to get a successful application. So I appreciate you guys talking about all of this housing as we come into 2022 and think about, here we are. I don't think any of us expected to continue the pandemic in a different way, but we are marching forward in Connecticut, and we have a lot of good things that are going on.
Thank you, Dawn. By the
You're
way, are you a year old yet in this
Not yet.
program?
Not yet. I was started in March of, so we're almost a year. I don't know. Sometimes it feels like not even a month, and other times it feels like 10 years. So it's interesting.
Well, this is a government program, and for those of you who believe you can't do anything quickly, you're the record setter, I would have to guess. That's a lot of work to do, to have a very complex website that was kind of pretty good from day one, as I recall it. And
I'll tell you, we've had amazing team partners pulling together on every level to make this happen. And we're really proud in Connecticut because we did a great job of securing the money for Connecticut and meeting all of Treasury's goals. So we're not at risk of losing anything. And we're in good position to get more as this evolves. Really, the funding for this money, there's 2 different tranches of money, and it technically can go out till 2026. So some states and some people throughout the country need more time. Connecticut, we're just showing that we could use more money because we definitely can help more people. So thanks for acknowledging that, though, Bob. There's been a lot of hard work by a lot of people.
Well, I've known you for a long time, and I don't know anybody who works any harder than you do. So
Thank you.
glad you have Connecticut's lucky to have you in this job, and I want to thank you for it. Our next speaker is Greg Gigali. I've known Greg for a long time. We've known each other through the Home Builders Association, and you've climbed the ladder to the top. And now you're teetering on the edge of not having to get up every morning and worry about some of those things. Greg, tell us what's happening nationally that would be useful to us here in Connecticut, and maybe particularly Middlesex County, because this is Middlesex County Chamber of Commerce.
Sure. Thanks, Bob. And, it's always good to be with Professor Fasari. We've done many things together, and let me tell you, he's not only a great person, but just a wealth of information across the board. And this Middlesex Chamber of Commerce, especially this group, is certainly a think tank in this area. And every time we get together and hash out these issues, along with RiverCog, for example, and certainly DOH and CHFA as well. But let's first set the stage for what we're talking about here. So nationally, we have a pretty good picture that we saw take place over the last couple of years, particularly the growth, the fact that we see double-digit growth across the country, a little bit testier in the New England area. But remember, in New England, especially Connecticut, Middlesex County, great example of how it took us much longer to get out of the last recession and break through some of these things. So when we saw these price increases, and especially the volume increases, we had a little bit tougher time making sure that we have the ability to continue. And that's why you saw some of the stats year over year from 2020 to 2021 even, how they stalled out a little bit. And we'll get into that. So, when you look at this, there's a number that I want everybody to think about and keep in mind as we go through some of these factors. For every $1,000 that we increase the price of a home, we displace 154,000 families, 154,000 lost opportunities for home purchasers for every $1,000 that we increase the purchase price of a home. Now, keep that in mind as we talk about some of these warning signs and some of the things that we're going to see that are affecting the country, but specifically here in Connecticut, is start off by all the supply chain issues that you hear, right? So year over year, we've increased the price of materials since 2020, 19%, 18.6% to be exact, for the cost of what it takes to build a home, to build an apartment unit. That's an incredible increase. Lumber alone, the increases in lumber alone are $35,000 per housing unit. So you look at the number I just gave you, that means it's over 5 million people being displaced, 5 million families being displaced for all these increases. Housing affordability is paramount important as we look at trying to house the workforce here in the state of Connecticut, to get first responders, school teachers, fire. We talk about it all the time, to get them in the communities where we want them to live and be able to move back and attract young people to our areas. Other things, we have an aging workforce across the country, but New England, Connecticut, Middlesex County, definitely. You know, our plumbers and electricians are averaging 65 years old. We need to start replacing our workforce. We have a lot of efforts in place, and we continue to work on these, but it's a lot of it's certainly friction that we have to overcome when when we see the demand that we face in order to keep up. So the lack of building sites is another one, you know, whether you call them lots, units, whatever. So if they're attached products, if they're apartment units, we need to be able to keep moving forward in producing enough places to build. You know, we have a commission that's starting that I was appointed to, and it's the Commission on Connecticut's Development and Future. And I think that we're continuing a lot of the themes that we've seen in the legislature as far as Connecticut and some other areas, especially with land use laws, regulations, and just making the process acceptable and workable as we try to meet some of our demand challenges. We have, you know, inflation's been, we're seeing it now the highest it's been in 40 years. So if we look at that, what's the next shoe that drops are going to be a few interest rate clicks, possibly 3 even in 2021. Anytime, remember, for every increase in the price of a home, including interest rates, you're going to see people that can no longer afford. It becomes much more difficult to provide affordable housing. And one other thing that I'll mention in this track here are the codes. You know, what we're looking at across the country is an effort. We see energy efficiency and resiliency, especially with the fires and storms, natural events. There's a lot of focus put on these. What we try to do as our industry is make sure that there's science and reasonableness behind any requirements. Again, you can't keep adding just for the sake of adding to the price of homes. But I did go to the Climate Change Summit in Glasgow, and it was interesting because, you know, our industry is the first to line up as well to get behind some of these protections. I mean, we have to protect our planet. We have to do it in a reasonable, meaningful way. I mean, these problems are not going away, and we really have to focus on them. So I think that when we look at this going forward, we put all of these things into the mix. So you see that we have a lot of headwinds. And looking forward to the demand that we have in this state, it's going to be hard for us to meet that. And that's why discussions like this, discussions we have with the COGs around the state, with different groups, are so important. We are setting our agenda for Home Connecticut. And the concept behind Home Connecticut to start with years ago when we first started the steering committee was a simple fact that if you increase density in development, you can drive down the cost of land, which therefore drives down the cost of housing. It's proportional too. So it's a great place to start by trying to control how much land costs. So if we could find voluntary places where local governments, local property owners, builders, developers are all in sync, finding these places around the state. There were financial incentives that were discussed through the legislature, a lot of studies done, and we are at the point now where every community needs housing, especially affordable housing that people can afford and that we can produce in a meaningful way. And you're going to hear terms like fair housing. You're gonna hear terms that come up when discussing what are everybody's responsibilities, what are communities' responsibilities to help us battle some of these problems. The Mirror, Connecticut Mirror did a great job highlighting some of the additional problems we see, systemic racism, some things that really make it difficult on the housing affordability side for so many groups, and it's just been perpetuated over time. So we have a lot of work to do in those areas. I think that we have to keep talking about these problems. We have to address the issues, but we have to remember, when I was chairman, my mantra was housing affordability, and it stuck with us because it is that critical that we continue making sure that every state, every community, but you look at Middlesex County, for example, the cost of housing has increased so much that, you try to get family members to be able to move in. You try to get your family members, students that want to come home. We have certain things like accessory dwelling units that might be able to chip in and help address these problems, but we have to hit this full speed and with every effort that we have to jump in. Our chief economist, Rob Dietz, at the Home Builders, he's cited all the time and comes up with the figures that governments are using. One of the things that we see, builder confidence is still high, but it's certainly being recognized, these issues that we're talking about today. But Bob, I think that as the other speakers did too, I think it's probably best to let's hear what's on people's minds and we'll share some thoughts that way. How does that sound?
Sounds fine, Greg. Thank you very much. I want you to think about, we're going to have everybody address this issue when we get the questions and answers. Think about what the private building industry can do to get more involved in affordable housing. And now I want to switch over to Sam Gold, who's the executive director of RiverCog. Sam's going to tell us how we're going to bring all these sites to the marketplace so that we have a place to build the houses when Greg figures out how we can do it effectively.
All right. Well, thank you, Bob, and thank you, Jeff, for holding this. And I want to thank the commissioner and Greg and Dawn for joining us today. So thank you very much. So I have a PowerPoint that I'm going to plow through, but looks like we might be running a little bit early. So I am grateful for that. Get that going. All right, so I've been asked to give an overview of the American Rescue Plan Act, our recently completed Regional Plan of Conservation and Development, and our ongoing Regional Housing Plan project. But first, I thought I would give everyone on the workshop just an overview of who RiverCog is. We're the regional planning organization for the Lower Connecticut River Valley region, and we're an association of 17 municipalities created by state statute and municipal ordinance. We are run by the 17 municipal CEOs, for selectmen, mayor, town managers, and we're responsible for regional planning, transportation planning, environmental planning, economic development planning, and regional shared services. And also, most interestingly, we're in the process of getting recognition by the federal government, by the US Census Bureau, as the county equivalent for Connecticut. This doesn't change anything for Connecticut law or statutes, but in the future, we'll be able to get census data along county lines. And it also may mean that the towns can band together through the COG to apply for federal grants through the COG together instead of individually, which may be helpful for getting federal competitive grants, because the rest of the country, we're competing against counties, not towns and cities. So I'll just quickly give an overview of the American Rescue Plan Act. You probably heard of ARPA. It's an unprecedented federal spending act that's provided states and municipalities with funding for COVID-19 recovery and some infrastructure projects. River-Cog municipalities, those 17 municipalities, are receiving approximately $60 million over 2 years. And just some projects that they're working together on with us include digitization of documents in municipal departments to allow more business to be transacted online. This will reduce the need to come into town hall in person. But what we also see this as facilitating is things like shared building departments that will facilitate contractors and builders being able to get documents, get permits, transact business off hours digitally. We're also in discussions with Middlesex County Revitalization Commission to help vet small business grants and loans. And we're also going to, we currently have an RFP for a shared assistance with how to report the expenditures under ARPA, make sure everyone's on the up and up with the US Treasury Department. Finally, the other intersection with affordable housing is ARPA funds can be used for water, sewer, and broadband internet expansions. I know in Old Saybrook, there was already a small water project that's already been funded by the town. As everyone knows, that the density can allow builders to build more affordable units, but in many places, the limiting factor, besides of course zoning, is the availability of public water or sewage disposal capacity. So that's how ARPA intersects a little bit with affordable housing conversation. I'll now transition over to our regional plan of conservation development. Our regional plan was completed last fall, and this was took many years in the process. And housing, of course, is an important component of any land use plan. And I want to thank Bob and Greg for attending, being our guests at one of our regional planning committee meetings. The regional planning committee oversaw the creation of our regional plan, and it provides an overview perspective of land use across our 17 towns. And it's an advisory document for our member municipalities. The power to zone and subdivide still remains with the towns, but this is meant to provide the larger view. What are the goals that we all should be working towards, and what is that vision? It's organized around 4 themes: sustainable, connected, innovative, and community. And in general, the plan recommends development in our town and regional centers near existing infrastructure. Let's make the best use of what we have already in the ground or on the ground, and keep our natural places that are so important to our quality of life and the attractiveness of our region green. And probably one of the most interesting components of this is our future land use map, which we were able to present to the public in a very innovative way online. So the regional future land use map is the geographic component of the 4 themes. You'll see purple is innovative. Those are areas where there's a potential for more commercial and industrial development. The yellow areas are areas for the theme community, areas where there's infrastructure that can support more housing or other community uses. And the green is really our existing open space, our state parks and forests, our municipal open space, our land trusts, and farmland. You notice that in the north of the region, around Middletown, is where we have really that density of uses of whether it be housing or commercial or industrial development, and also along the I-95 Boston Post Road, Route 1 corridor in the southern part of the region. with a smattering up through the valley. Darker color also indicates a recommendation for more intense or higher density use. We overlay on that our connected theme, which is really our major transportation corridors. Obviously, that's dominated by our Interstate 95, Route 9, a little portion of 91, but also some of our important state routes that connect us to other parts of the state. But I think the most interesting and compelling part of this plan, first of all, I'm going to stop sharing this and I'm going to share a website. If you go to our website, this is rivercog.org/plans. You'll find our regional plan document. You'll find the appendices, and you'll find this link for an interactive land use map. And you click on that. Hopefully you'll see this. Do you see the map loading up? Please respond yes or no if you can, or nod. Hopefully you can see it. And you'll see on the upper right, there's a number of different layers that you can turn on, such as regional open space, major roads, railroads, and you'll see the different data sets populate over the town outlines. You can also see sewer infrastructure, public water infrastructure. And then you can also look at the themes from our regional plan. So items from our different innovative composite layer, the sustainability composite layer, and see how they all interact. Also, we have regional zoning. And if you click down a little arrow, there'll be details of what those are. C is commercial, the green is conservation. They're actually, if you click more, you'll actually be able to get better definitions of what those are. But this is a very powerful tool. You can print maps, you can download maps. We're hopeful that this will be a useful tool for our land use commissioners, our towns, and our developers as they look for places that where affordable development could take place. Then I'm going to move back to the presentation. And I'm going to quickly talk about our regional housing plan. So RiverCog is in the middle of creating a regional housing plan. This is the first regional housing plan for RiverCog, and it's based on the work that we completed as part of our regional plan of conservation and development. It also fulfills the state statute requirement of Section 830J of the statutes. 830J requires every municipality in the state to have a plan, an up-to-date plan every 5 years on how it's going to expand development of Section 830G compliant housing. 830J is very short. There's not a lot of information in it. So it provides a lot of flexibility for how towns are to address this issue. 12 of our 17 municipalities have decided to go in together and work together through the COG and use our regional housing plan process as a regional framework. Our regional housing plan meets one of the new requirements under the federal infrastructure law that as part of our transportation planning work that we consider housing. Because if you think about it, housing and transportation are linked. Where people live are where trips are generated. So that new federal Infrastructure and Jobs Act is recognizing that those connections there. And particularly when you're talking about affordability, access to transit, whether it be our Shoreline East commuter rail, the southern part of the region, or our Ninetown or Middletown area transit bus systems, or connections over to the CT Rail Hartford line over in Meriden, those transit connections are very important for people to access housing, access jobs, and be able to get around and live their lives. And furthermore, those transit connections are getting ever more important as the price of gas has risen dramatically over the last couple of years. So just to wrap up on the regional housing plan, housing markets are regional. So having that regional context, I think, is important when you're looking at affordability. We also have an issue, particularly in the southern part of Middlesex County. The definition of affordability under 830G is 60 or 80% of median income. And when the HUD median income for southern Middlesex County is over $100,000, that does not meet the needs of particularly our essential service workers who make well below $60,000 a year. So we're taking this opportunity to look at what can be done to provide housing for everyone in our community, particularly those essential workers that we need in our region to fill the jobs that make our region go. And then finally, we're also looking at a more expansive look at housing, particularly mismatched supply and demand. There's been a growing demand for multifamily and a rather anemic demand for single family. Our aging population has different housing needs than they did when they were younger and had kids. And we have a general need to attract younger residents. Those younger residents are essential for our economy, to fill positions in our local businesses, and to play multiple roles in our communities, whether it be volunteer emergency services or taking roles on our commissions in town, or filling or having the families that fill our schools with kids. So, and I'm going to put a plug in for this Monday at 7 o'clock. We're having our second public workshop for our regional housing plan. You can register and get the link for that workshop at rivercog.org/projects/regional housing plan or RHP. Also on that website, you'll find recordings of our past workshops. I recommend watching Dr. Don Poland's housing market analysis presentation. It's very interesting. And just for the timeline of this project, we expect the regional housing plan and the municipal 830J plans to be completed this spring. By statute, they're required to be completed and adopted by the beginning of June. And we are on track for that. So with that, I'll just close with my contact info. Please reach out if you have any questions, and I can get this presentation over to Jeff with the links after today's workshop. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Sam. Great job as always. You're the gold, that's probably not the right way to put it, but you're the gold standard for the Regional Planning Agency and its housing plan. I'm glad to be part of that. I just want to interject here and a quick question. Not so much a question, but an observation. I've been with this affordable housing issue, both locally and with the chamber, for quite some time. And I have noticed a different attitude of the local towns toward affordable housing. Towns, I'm not going to mention them right now, maybe you will do that, but towns that you would never have thought of that would be supporting affordable housing are doing so actively. Could you comment on that a little bit?
Yeah, so I think that there has in the past, ever since 830G was adopted by the state 30 years ago, I think there was an adversarial relationship created just by the nature of the law. The law is an appeal of a municipal planning and zoning's decision, and so it's an adversarial us and them sort of a relationship. What we've been seeing in recent years is what some of our towns are calling friendly 830G applications, where the municipality is partnering with the developer, but going to use the ability of 830G to go around the existing zoning. So I think there's a great deal of openness to having more affordable housing in our region. Of course, there's still hiccups here and there, but I think people are realizing that they want their kids to come back to the region, and there's not housing for them. Or you have people who are looking to downsize from a 4-bedroom home, and they want something that's smaller and meets their needs better, and maybe better for someone on a fixed income. So I think there's a more holistic understanding of housing and how everyone needs a place to live. And our community needs to be open and accommodating to the people we need to be here. I think it became very evident during the worst of the shutdown back in 2020 that we still had essential service workers, whether they worked at the hospital or Stop and Shop, that needed to go to work. And it is, for us to have a healthy economy and we need to have some amount of housing for people at all those different pay levels. In addition, we probably also need good transit to sort of fill in the rest, because we may not be able to provide all the housing that we need. But with the combination of transit and I think communities partnering with developers, I think we can make a good dent in our deficits in this area.
Thank you, Sam. Jeff, you want to take it over from here on questions and answers? I want to encourage everybody who's tuned in to use either the chat facility or the Q&A facility of this webinar so that your voice can be heard, your questions can be answered. Go.
So Jeff,
Thank you,
I see
Bob.
a question in the box that I can start off if you'd like.
Sure, go ahead, Sam.
All right, so Calvin Price, good to see you or see you. See your question. How much of the ARPA funds are being allocated to housing development? It's a good question. It's a question that's been asked by a number of towns. Unfortunately, the ARPA funds are more closely tailored towards impacts from COVID. So some towns have come up with ideas of how to provide programming to divert people from going into shelters, because during a pandemic, people don't want to be in congregate homeless shelters. How can you avoid people having to go there? It has to be very closely tailored to the pandemic and addressing people's risk of getting sick or spreading the virus. So there's really no direct ARPA money being spent on constructing housing, but there are ways that municipalities can get creative, particularly with some of the infrastructure abilities of using this money for, let's say, sewer and water. If that was paired with a development that would provide affordable housing, that would be allowable. There's also there is some flexibility for towns to replace lost tax revenue, and the definition that the U.S. Treasury is allowing towns to use of calculating that loss in tax revenue is actually quite generous. So by doing that, they can actually potentially use some of this money for subsidizing housing, because it would be treated as general fund tax revenue. But in general, ARPA was not intended for what we need more of, which is subsidies to help us build affordable housing, particularly for the lowest income workers. Because as I said, it's very difficult for developers to make money on housing, particularly in our part of Connecticut, where land prices are high, and you need rents and prices to be at a certain level, so someone, let's say, making $30,000 can afford it. So that's going to be the challenge for providing housing for at the lowest end, is the subsidies. And unfortunately, ARPA does not provide the best vehicle for those subsidies.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Sam. Great answer. We're getting a lot of questions into the chamber about authorized uses of ARPA dollars. And so that's a very helpful primer and way to kick off the Q&A. I'm going to go actually into the Q&A portal, take a break from the chat just for a moment. We had some questions come in early in the presentation during the Commissioner and Dawn's remarks. So I'll start there. The first one is from Juliet Kavanaugh, who's an excellent member of ours and on our executive committee. I'll read it verbatim. We applied for rental relief for one of our tenants back in September, and although everything was submitted, the case has yet to be assigned to a case manager. Why the delay? What was $5,000 in back rent is now close to $15,000 as tenants stopped paying entirely. We are unable to speak to anyone at Unite CT, and it's extremely frustrating and financially crippling to our landlords. Okay, there's an opening salvo there. Dawn, you want to take that one to start?
Sure. Yeah, of course. So there's a lot of different reasons why an application may not be moving. It does require that tenants and landlords both fully complete all sections of their parts of the application and submit that. And sometimes people, one person or the other starts, and then they come back and add more to their application over time. So it's like we look at those case by case to see like what the story is behind it. The other thing is there's just incredible need. So I kind of mentioned that there's 90,000 people who have touched the system, and it could be that it got, misplaced. Usually if it's fully submitted, everything's submitted by the tenant and the landlord, it comes together at that point and gets assigned for case review. But on those one-off cases, like we have the Unite CT resource centers, which in Middlesex County is CRT. And if you go onto the Unite CT website, you can say like, where's my local resource center? And it gives you all the contact information. There's also additional tools on the website that help to tell people like, is my application complete? Like, how come I'm not moving? And there's more how-tos to make sure that it's complete and things like that. But for specific questions, like certainly reach out to the resource center, or like from here, that person can send me an email. I put my email in the response and we can find out what's happening in that particular case. But in general, it really just comes down to time and time again, from the point that both the tenant and the landlord have fully completed their parts of the application is what we have to work with. But from the tenant and landlord's perspective, sometimes the timing is very different from when they first started their parts. So let me know specifically on that one.
Okay, will do.
I think that was like pretty much a good overview of that, what happens in those situations.
Okay, quick follow-up one that just came in. I hate to put it to the front, but I think it's related. In the case where a tenant refuses to participate, how do landlords obtain funds that are potentially owed to them?
This is actually a great question. So the Unite CT program, this emergency funding from Treasury, is a tenant-based program. So tenants must comply and do their parts in order for us to help anyone get funding. If there's a tenant that's not participating, then really that's a legal conversation. So like the landlord really needs to get legal help involved because in the state of Connecticut, everyone's on board with trying to make this work together. And so if the tenant's refusing, then the landlord now has a legal situation on their hands. In addition, there are different funding for landlords and property owners through their mortgage companies. And also, depending on if they live in that multifamily, CHFA could be a resource. There's different programs at CHFA. So just keep in mind, the bottom line is this is a tenant-based program, so they have to be part of it.
Understood. Thank you, Dawn. I'm going to jump to another question here. Sam may have covered it slightly in his remarks, but perhaps the commissioner and/or Sam can weigh in. We are working with many of our towns developing their affordable housing plans. It would be great to give them a cheat sheet on how funding availability has changed or is changing in the next year or so. Is such a resource available? So maybe Commissioner, if you want to take a crack at that first, and then Sam can do a follow-up.
Sure. Thank you, Jeff. And thank you for that question. So most of our resources are listed in the website of the Department of Housing, as well as Connecticut Housing Finance Authority. So basically with the Department of Housing, what we're trying to actually suggest and recommend is for people who has projects to come and talk to us. Because there are different resources that we get, and we can pair up with the needs of that particular town. We have small cities, CDBG. So in order for the complexity of these projects to work, it's good to have a conversation. So with the Department of Housing has twice a year, we have something called development engagement process. Basically, we're not doing rounds, but we allow people to come and talk to us, even if they're concepts. We create our pipeline, and those that are ready to proceed, then we'll pair up with the resources that we have available. So the best way will be come and talk to us. We'll provide you technical assistance. We'll provide you the resources that might be needed for those particular projects.
Tim, any follow-up from a COG perspective on a potential cheat sheet for the housing and the availability of funding?
So I know that there's been a lot of discussion in Washington with the Build Back Better and the other bills that are now in doubt. I would assume that there would be funding that might be available to those if they ever did move forward. I'm also assuming that in the infrastructure bill that there'll be funding possibly on the energy efficiency side that might be helpful for affordable housing development. But yeah, besides those two areas, I'm not aware of much else.
Understood. Thank you very much. We're going to transition here, stay in the Q&A portal, but this one is for Greg. I'm sorry, Dawn, did you have something you wanted to add to that? I saw that you unmuted. No? Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, we're going to Greg here. This is from Jim Paris. The question is, what kind of difficulties would occur for private multifamily developers should stretch codes be implemented here in Connecticut? Greg?
Okay, yeah, thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Jim, too. That's a great question. You know, first, so everybody understands, stretch code is exactly what it implies in the title. So you have your base codes, you have these uniform codes that we look at throughout the country, and we're creating in many jurisdictions the ability to stretch the codes, making them stricter than the base code. What does that mean? It from our standpoint, it poses a lot of issues and problems, because if you're going to start making financial decisions and requiring things that are going to add to the price of a home quite substantially with a lot of these provisions, we have a deep concern, because we always insist that science be the best answer for a lot of these provisions that are considered in stretch codes. So, and actually, Jim and Bob, this I can kind of tie Bob's initial question in too, just to wrap this up. So when you talk about how do we get the private sector involved, the for-profit people, how do we make it so that it's palatable to just do more of the building, especially when it comes to, as Sam was referring to, the people that are challenged the most financially? Well, there's really two buckets of risk that we have to control. The first one is, and the way it works in Connecticut, when you sign a contract as a builder, you're responsible for any increases in any material shortages and trying to cover them with other products. So once you lock in, so everybody saw prices in homes going up, a lot of that never even made it to the builders and developers. It was just gone with all these increases and delays and things. So we have to look at that risk. And the second one is the risk of, for the longest time, we were able to negotiate as developers with landowners, and you would allocate the risk of approvals and the cost of approvals. In this day and age, it's become so encumbersome that very few people are willing to put up the engineering costs, all the prep work that you need to be able to take it in and present it to the town and the state to get the entitlements that you need, all the approvals. So that's another bucket that we have to get the private sector comfortable with in order to take on both those risk pots. And, you know, we have governmental entities such as CHFA and so on that are trying to help with some of these things. But, you know, to now just to finish with the stretch code question, it is a serious issue for multifamily developers, because if you take any piece of that, and depending on what the science is behind it and what you're trying to solve, I mean, by reducing emissions or whatever if that cost needs to be spread over all the units, you could quickly see how you're going to lose anything affordable about it if we're not careful. So again, it has to be well thought out, and common sense, especially in science, have to be brought into the picture whenever you're talking about code development, but especially in the situation of when we're reviewing stretch codes.
Great answer, Greg. Thank you very much. I'm going to jump into the chat, but Bob, take a look at the Q&A portal if you can. Jim Paris has a question that I'll throw to you after we chip away at the chat a little bit here. First, Dawn from Cal, how much Unite CT money is going to Hartford County and New Haven County? And as a follow-up, do we have any idea of how many tax credit applications will be approved and how much tax credit money is available?
Okay, I'll have the commissioner take the tax credit one. But
Okay.
for Unite CT, honestly, I would say to go to the website to talk about the towns, because we have the dashboard that changes every day. And so the numbers for the counties are listed on there. And I didn't pull it up specifically for New Haven or, but let me see, let's let the commissioner.
Don, you're correct, right? So people should go to the website. It has actually by town individually, but I went in the website and it's 31% for Hartford County and 31% to New Haven County. Those are, if you take the $200 million, 31% has gone to Hartford and 33% has gone to New Haven.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And then specifically, you can go into each town and you will know how many applications and how much each town has gotten. I think we only have 3 towns in Connecticut that have not had any resources going to those towns. And on the applications for low-income housing tax credit, CHFA received 15 applications this past January 12th, actually was last week. A request of almost $20 million in tax credits. And you know, the tax credits are allocated based on population. So the CHFA will have more or less about $10 million. So it's about half of the requested amount.
Okay, good stuff. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Dawn. Jumping back to the Q&A here, Bob, I hope you had a chance to take a look, but I'll read it for the benefit of our audience. The question is for Bob: can regulatory changes with regard to septic systems positively impact multifamily development in Connecticut?
Well, a number of ways. First off, if we get what we're asking for, which is a reduction in the design standard of gallons per day per bedroom, the real gallons per day per bedroom is somewhere between 50 and 60. The design standard is 150. And we've been working for years, probably a decade, to get that lower. The reason for the lower number is the codes for years now have required water saving devices, and the cost of water has gone up so dramatically that people are working actively to conserve beyond the devices themselves. We're designing for something that was put into effect 20-some years ago, so we can put in smaller systems. The other factor is to eliminate the reserve area. We have not found anybody who uses the reserve area. System fails, you dig it up and put it back in the place where it was. If that happens. In today's world, systems that have been installed in the last 10 years, 20 years, don't fail because they're designed properly, they're installed properly, and they're inspected properly. So they're just not used. So we get better land use. And I think, Sam, that gives us the kind of density that we're looking for, particularly in the suburban towns where this housing is sorely needed. Virtually all of the housing, the towns that do not meet the 10% requirement are suburban towns. And Middlesex County is not without a few of those towns. So the use of improvements in this, and there's two issues, they're regulatory, they are not legislative. There are things we can do legislatively to improve it, but we can lower the cost, increase the density, and increase the number of units before we have to go to DEP to get approval. That's where all of these things together, the actual smaller system cost is probably the less of all of the dollars you can save, but it's the incidental residual effects of that reduction that's going to seriously impact positively our ability to build affordable housing where sewer does not exist.
Great answer. Thank you, Bob, very much. Moving back into the chat here, this is most likely for our colleagues from DOH, and it has been covered in some way, but I want to respect the question and I'll read it out. It's dealing with how to help people buy their first home. Is there a program to be a first-time landlord? I know we've touched on it, but just if we can specifically answer that, perhaps Commissioner, and then Dawn as a follow-up.
Sure. Thank you for that question. We don't have a specific program for landlords or for first-time landlords. CHFA does have a program for down payment assistance and mortgages at a lower market rate for first-time home buyers or for buyers that are buying a unit or up to 4 units. So if somebody wants to start with small number of units, that's a good program.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And there's also, it's not necessarily phrased as a question or submitted as a question, but there's a comment about the potential expansion of USDA territory. I know that's federal jurisdiction, but anybody care to weigh in since it was entered into the chat?
Yeah, I'll just mention that. So, so one thing that people forget about, particularly for Section 830G, is that subsidized mortgages through CHFA or the U.S. Department of Agriculture count as affordable units for the purposes of 830G. And many people don't know that in the rural parts of our state, they may be eligible for a mortgage through the U.S. Department of Agriculture. I think, I don't know if there's anything we can do to expand the areas of where of those rural areas, but we can definitely do a better job on expanding people's knowledge and awareness of USDA mortgage programs. So I think that's where we can have an impact with our towns, getting the word out that particularly in some of the rural parts of our suburban towns or our rural towns, that the USDA does provide mortgages that are at very competitive and supportive rates for people. And when you hear USDA, you don't think mortgages. So I think that's how we can help.
Very true. Thank you very much, Sam. Moving on down the line here. This is an interesting one. I own some office space that I'd like to convert to affordable apartments. Who can help to guide me through the process of financing the conversion, which will cost exponentially more than maintaining the space as offices? I'll throw that to any of our panelists who care to weigh in. Sam, you want to start?
I'll just start just with the CPACE program. It's maybe just a little tangent, but CPACE is a program through the Connecticut Green Bank, which allows a building owner to borrow money for, let's say, building envelope or major mechanicals for that building. Of course, if you're going from a commercial to residential use, it's going to take a large investment in some of those upgrades, and that money will be repaid over time as a line item on the tax bill, and it follows the property, not the property owner. So the property owner can sell that building in the future before the debt is paid off. So I think that's one way of getting some financing for some of the work. But sorry, Commissioner, I'll let you.
It's all right. You can come and talk to me. Jeff, you can put my email. Or Dawn, can you put my email, because I don't know how to use the Zoom and add to the chat. But definitely, come and talk to us.
Excellent. That's great.
Okay. I'm going to chime in on that question a little bit, particularly as it relates to not just the conversion of office space or commercial space to apartments, but also the thing we talked about earlier of accessories. People who own a single family house and want to either make a home improvement to an accessory, another dwelling unit, one way or the other. These are the least experienced people to operate that unit once it's built. They go out and hire a contractor or a designer and get it built as they would get a basement finished. I mean, that's not a terribly difficult thing to do. But how does the average homeowner operate within the law? And are there any educational programs available for the Bob Piazzaris of this world who've got a house that's 4 times as big as I need, but I've never rented anything as before, and I don't know what to do. I'm scared. I'm afraid of it. How do you do that? Don't all speak at once.
Well, I'll just say that Lisa Kidder, our friend and colleague on the committee with CHFA, did put into the chat, following up our landlord program. CHFA offers a home buyer education class specifically for landlords. It may not be directly related, but it sounds like they have some educational offerings coming out of CHFA, which potentially could be a resource.
Okay.
So Bob, that's a great suggestion. I don't think that there is anything like that for education for a homeowner. I myself went to the town of Milford. I'm doing in addition to a in-law apartment, if you will. And I did the process because I have been a developer before. So it might be overwhelmed for some of homeowners. It's a great suggestion that we could perhaps the Department of Housing can sponsor an education seminar with the COGS. And I'm looking at Sam, so maybe we can follow up on that. I'm more than happy to provide resources to do something.
I think that'd be very useful. And if you promoted it, then people who maybe have it in the back of their minds will bring it to the front of their minds. And either it could be an online educational process, it could be a group, or it could be held in a municipal office or a COG office or something like that. But it seems to me that there's a barrier, I think, to maximizing the utilization of that opportunity. And it is an opportunity that I think most towns are looking at seriously. Thank you.
And Commissioner, I think using the COGS would be a great suggestion. I know that there's at least there's other COGS in the audience today, and I can follow up with you offline to get the word.
That'd be great, Sam.
All right, back to the Q&A here. We're moving right along. Great questions and great answers here. This one is for the commissioner from the Q&A. The New York, I don't know if it's the governor of New York or necessarily just the government in general, just released a bold budget proposal. It must be the governor in this case for New York State that recommends $25 billion in spending for housing, including $1 billion in spending to build new multifamily and adaptive reuse to households that earn 60% AMI, and $90 million for new construction and adaptive reuse for households at 60% to 130% AMI. And $80 million for mixed-use affordable housing developments that may include retail, commercial, or community development components. Can we expect similar bold initiatives in housing here in Connecticut in the coming years?
So we could expect something, but not as similar because New York is pretty big, right? So we all go through scale. We do have in our budget $300 million in bonds for these next 2 years, in addition to the funds that we're getting from the federal government and working with Connecticut Housing Finance Authority on the low-income housing tax credit, the state housing tax credit. So we do have resources and we're taking different steps to increase our program. So it's just the beginning of the year. You will hear more about some of the programs that we're gonna have in the next, the first quarter of this year.
Great, thank you very much. This one probably is also directed at you, Commissioner. A little rapid fire here. Let me get back to the chat. Do we have any updated information on NAA tax credits and their availability in 2022?
I don't, and we don't manage those credits. Those are the cities and the towns.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll try to get some feedback on the municipal side. Okay, I do have one question that came in through email. I will direct it towards Greg, if you don't mind. Since you are a builder, of course, a very successful one and very engaged in the community and a CHFA board member, what do you think are the most effective tools to address the lack of affordable housing? Greg?
So, you know, it's interesting, and I think that you could tell by this conversation we're having today, for the first time in a long time, everybody is willing to come to the table and to have these discussions. For the longest time, so many lines were being drawn, but you start right at the top. So the commissioner, as you could tell by her speaking today, it's contagious how excited she gets about the process, knowledgeable as a previous developer, and you can see it at DOH as well as CHFA. And the tools that are being made available to the private sector, public sector, everybody. You look at coalitions like the Home Connecticut group. For the first time, we're signing letters together that were groups that paths would rarely cross because of the differences, rather than looking at all the similarities we have. So you could tell by these questions, funding is a big piece of what has to happen in this state in order to provide housing across the spectrum that's needed. But all of this can be talked through, and the tools that we have, the monetary tools as well as trying to ease up the burdens of obtaining approvals, that those can all be adjusted and smoothed out to make it easier for everybody involved on the government side, the private side, public side. And at the end of the day, it's those types of things, combining the tools in the ease of the process, that will help drive the price down. And we're encouraged by seeing everybody that's willing to have those discussions.
And
Right.
I can just add just
Please.
one thing, Jeff, on what Greg just said, is about not only to have millions of dollars promised, right, to do this type of work, but it's the infrastructure that we put together. And we're not gatekeepers, right? So we have to be able to deploy the resources that we have in a way that is efficient. And I took this position 2 years ago, or almost 3 years ago, and the infrastructure wasn't there. There were many barriers, right? So it has been, then we have a pandemic, but we have been able to move to a different direction where projects actually are happening and are being built. So we're going to continue with that. We're not there yet. We're not perfect. We still have a lot of work to do. But between the two organizations, DOH and CHFA, really, we have made a lot of improvement, and we'll continue working together to minimize the amount of time, because time is money. If we keep projects forever, they're going to just keep increasing the cost. So we're trying to reduce that, because we understand that will make an effect, a positive effect in the production of the housing that we need.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Commissioner. It looks like we've gotten through all of our questions in the Q&A and in the chat. Greg and Celia had a chance to kind of offer some closing remarks. I'll give Dawn and Sam the opportunity to do so if they wish, and then we'll have Bob be the official closer of the event here. Sam, Dawn, anything you want to close with?
Sure, I'll start. And I just wanted to just hit upon one thing that the question about the commercial property being turned into housing. I think the pandemic has shown that people are less connected to place when it comes to work and shopping as they used to. So I think there's going to be some challenges, but also a lot of opportunities with commercial properties and changing use. And I think there's a lot of work and education on the side of the municipalities to get them open towards imagining, places that might be underutilized retail or commercial office space to be a mixed use housing, and opportunities to create walkable environments so that people can live near where they work or they shop. And because we might not need as much of the same space as we did before the pandemic. So I just want to put that out there as something which going forward, I think there's an opportunity for reuse and adaptive reuse of buildings. And in that, we can help address some of the affordability housing crisis issues.
Dawn.
I would just like to say thank you to everybody who works together out there in the community, because Unite CT really is a reflection of the state of Connecticut. And just knowing that we were able to pull all partners together in a very quick time frame and get flying, like the whole country was saying, we're flying an airplane as we built it. And that's the way we all felt. And Connecticut's plane has been flying for a long time now in the relative scheme of things. And we have a lot of information. So while we've been able to pay out 44,000 cases, we know some trends. And those trends are going to be what Connecticut does next. And so that we can really drill in and look at common themes and figure out what we can do in addition. And that goes to all the stakeholders in Connecticut being that invested to say, like, it's not over, it's starting, and what do we do next? And it's a constant evolution. So thank you there's a lot of people on this call that play significant roles in making sure we keep moving forward. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, on behalf of the Chamber, I do want to thank all of our panelists and our attendees. This was an excellent hour-and-a-half conversation, and hopefully the first in a very constructive series. So Bob, anything you want to close with on behalf of the committee and the Chamber?
Yeah, I want to thank everybody for their participation. I'm very pleased with the way things went. I'm going to go give the commissioner one more challenge. The thing that we talked about 2 years ago, and you know what it is, how do we get the private sector and the nonprofit sector to partner, each doing what they do best, to produce a better result for affordable housing in Connecticut. I believe in my heart that those two entities are not opposed to each other, that they have something to offer. I've been on both sides of that, as you know, both as a private builder for more years than I want to count, and involved in the nonprofit side, particularly with the Hope Partnership in Old Saybrook. And as Sam said, the adaptive reuse of that project in Centerbrook is a good example of that. And now one in Madison, a town that you would have never guessed would be supporting an affordable housing project in town. Well, it's also opposing another one, interestingly. But I want to thank the members, and we're going to debrief this on Friday. Am I correct, Jeff, with our regular meeting? So the members of this committee that are on this webinar, we meet at 9:30 Friday morning. Make your notes, and the objective of this was really to broaden the scope of what we're talking about. And the next one we do, which we expect will be in a few more months, and hopefully it'll be in person, is want to zero in on one of the subjects we thought, or two, that we talked about today, and get into more depth as to what is being done and how we can move forward with these things, and how we can all pitch in and help. So I'm going to thank you again, and I want you all to have a great day.
Jeff, I just need to respond to Bob. You're welcome to come and visit me, and we'll talk about it.
We'll do that. We got to
Thank you,
do that
Bob.
when we're able to meet each other face to face.
Yep. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone. Take care, be well, and we'll be in touch real soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.